two of motorsport's most legendary races, two identical power units. Yet one circuit melts them to the edge of failure, while the other keeps them ice cold, even at a crawl through tight corners. Monaco whispers through hairpins. Singapore screams flat out under tropical sun. Same engine, two completely opposite crises. And the engineering tricks teams deploy to survive each one. They'll fundamentally change how you understand why these circuits demand entirely different cars. This isn't just about comfort or speed. It's about which team understands thermal management well enough to win. Overheat at Monaco, and you lose reliability in the final stint when it matters most. Push Singapore's cooling limits, and your engine seizes mid-lap with no safety net. Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, whoever cracks the cooling puzzle at these two extremes doesn't just finish first. They finish without a retirement. But here's what makes this truly fascinating. The solutions that save you at one circuit will destroy you at the other. That's why teams arrive with completely different setups, radiator configurations, and fuel strategies for each race, even though the calendar puts them just weeks apart. Let's start with what actually happens to an F1 engine when it's running through the streets of Monaco at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. Your car is barely above idle speed, maybe 40–50 kilometers per hour through the tunnel, but the engine's still producing nearly 1,000 horsepower. That's enormous potential energy confined to a tiny space with nowhere to go. Now picture the radiators. On a normal circuit, wind rushing over the car does 70% of the cooling work. Airflow is your friend. But at Monaco, you're crawling. You're stationary in qualifying. The air isn't moving fast enough to strip heat away, so every joule of thermal energy stays trapped inside the cooling system like heat locked in a greenhouse. Singapore is the opposite problem, but somehow worse. The Marina Bay circuit demands full throttle down long straights, flat-out acceleration in high humidity, and 31-degree ambient temperature. Your radiators are screaming to work. The airflow is finally there. But the air itself is so hot and so saturated with moisture that it can barely cool anything. It's like trying to cool a kettle by blowing warm, wet breath on it. Here's the physics that separates these two races. Monaco needs radiators that work at low speeds, which means larger surface area and thinner cores. But that design creates more drag at speed, which costs you everywhere else. Singapore needs maximum cooling capacity, so teams bolt on larger radiators and run aggressive aero angles. But at Monaco, that exact setup generates so much drag through the tight corners that you're hemorrhaging lap time. The rubber compounds make it worse. A tire at Monaco stays relatively cool because you're not cornering hard enough to generate the heat. A tire at Singapore is working at absolute limit. The asphalt is hotter, and all that friction becomes thermal energy that bleeds through the suspension into the chassis and radiator system. This is why teams don't compromise. They can't. One setup will guarantee you finish, the other guarantees a failure. And that margin, that ruthless engineering choice, is where championships are decided. So when a team arrives at either circuit, they're not just changing wing angles or brake balance. They're fundamentally redesigning how their car moves air and manages heat, knowing that the solution for one would be a disaster for the other. Let's look at two moments where this thermal knife's edge decided everything. 2008. Felipe Massa and Ferrari arrive at Singapore with a radiator configuration optimized for the extreme heat and humidity. Larger cores, maximum cooling capacity, full-size intercoolers. But in qualifying, the car's brake temperatures soar into dangerous territory because that aggressive cooling package forces the aero setup into a compromise. Less efficient braking zones, more drag on corner entry. Ferrari qualified third, but more importantly, they struggled all weekend to balance brake temperatures with engine cooling, and it cost them positions and strategy flexibility during the race. Compare that to 2015 at Monaco, when Mercedes brought an ultralight radiator configuration to minimize drag through the tunnel and the tight right-hander at Portier. Lewis Hamilton qualified on pole, But during the race, as ambient temperature crept up and the car was idling through slower sections, the cooling system couldn't dissipate enough heat in the stagnant air. Mercedes burned significant fuel managing engine temperature rather than pushing flat out. And that thermal management window directly affected their tyre strategy and how aggressively they could defend against rivals. Neither team made a mistake. They simply faced an impossible choice. The Monaco setup would have left them cooking at Singapore. The Singapore setup would have left them dragging ballast around Monaco's tight corners. That's the reality both circuits impose. You engineer for one and you accept defeat at the other. So here's the question that keeps engineers awake. What if you simply brought Monaco's radiator setup to Singapore and called it a day? On paper, it sounds sensible. Less weight, lower drag, proven to work under lower thermal load. But in the Caribbean humidity, at full throttle for lap after lap, with no cool-down phases, that ultralight configuration would hit critical temperature before lap 10. Conversely, bring Singapore's oversized coolers to Monaco, and you're hauling an extra 8 kilos of ballast through the slowest corners on the calendar. You've seeded qualifying and tyre life before you've even raced. Neither choice wins. One just loses slower than the other. So here's what we've learned. Cooling isn't one problem. It's a circuit-by-circuit chess match where every answer is a compromise. Monaco rewards the surgeon's touch, precision, patience, minimal drag, while Singapore demands brute force and thermal overdraft. Lap after lap with no mercy. The teams that win don't find a magic setup. They accept they'll struggle somewhere and they engineer ruthlessly for where it matters most. Now we want to hear from you. Should we tackle tyre deg on temporary layouts next, or dive into how active aerodynamics change everything in 2026? Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop your vote in the comments below. Your passion for this stuff is what keeps us digging deeper.